The country's leading literary society is facing a crisis. Fellows at the Royal Society of Literature are in revolt against what they see as its high-handed, autocratic leadership. So, to tell us more, I'm delighted to welcome the prize-winning author and former Royal Society Fellow, Miranda Seymour.
Thank you.
Now, you resigned from the Royal Society of Literature in November, I believe. Do you want to tell us why?
I would say that when I was made a Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature, which is quite different from the Society of Authors, which is for all writers.
Yes.
But the Society of Literature is something that you work towards. You get made a Fellow only when you've written 2 books that are reckoned, or more, that are meant to be really well thought of by other fellows, and then they nominate you. And I think, like lots of other people, well, like all fellows, I felt it was the proudest day of my life. I was absolutely thrilled. So to resign was very hard for me. And I resigned because I'd been feeling increasingly that the society was not doing what it should in terms of defending people and standing up for writers and freedom of speech. And I went in November to the AGM, which used to be held with a rather jolly party in the summer, and has now been moved to a very secretive, difficult, inaccessible location in the middle of November. Not a fun thing to do. So hardly anybody there, which I sort of felt was what they wanted.
Really?
They were asked by people from the audience, a very small audience, who could defend the fact that the Royal Society of Literature had failed. They were the only society, I think, which failed to write a letter of support for Salman Rushdie after that appalling knife attack on him.
This is so important, isn't it? Because we didn't realise until last week when Dame Marina Warner, a former president of the society, came out and said, no, there's been infighting. They'd said, that the leadership of the society had said, we won't put out a statement to defend Salman Rushdie's right to free speech because that would be controversial, it would cause offence. Now,
incredible.
What do you make of that?
Well, I wrote down something which is pretty amazing, because this is what the Royal Society of Literature has said in the past. We do not condone violence towards authors. We believe that authors should be free of harm when expressing their views. And that's practically their motto. It ought to be up there on their website. We stand for the right of writers to express their views.
And yet the current president this week on The Guardian wrote an article saying we don't get involved in political disputes. And, of course, Salman Rushdie pointed out, you know, this is something you should be... let me just give you another example.
A lot of backtracking going on there.
A lot. Well, good. But then there was also the case of Kate Clancy, the poet, who was treated appallingly on social media, accused of all sorts of things that was absolutely not true, racism, ableism.
Horrible story.
And no defence from the Royal Society. They threw her under the bus.
And even more surprisingly, the director, the current director, had actually been to 2 of these schools where Kate Clancy worked with children most of us would have great difficulty with from the least privileged parts of the world. And she was beloved by her pupils. Molly Rosenberg went along to 2 of those classes and then apparently directed that the Royal Society of Literature should not defend her. And she resigned. How could she not?
I find that incredible. And, of course, in that case, as you say, her pupils, who were the subject of the book she had written, they thought it was wonderful, that they had no problem with the book at all. It was other people. It
was almost as though the Royal Society of Literature had sided against her. And that's what feels so awful to me about both that and Salman Rushdie.
Why is this, do you think? Why are so many people who are meant to side with authors, that's their raison d'etre, why are they failing to do this? Do you have any idea?
It seems to have begun out of a fear that they could be censored themselves, which is a very poor spirit. I mean, Tom Stoppard said, I think in December, that if anything is a thing that writers should stand for, it's freedom of expression. The Royal Society of Literature, called such a grand name, should above all these societies defend writers in their right to say anything. So, I mean, if we'd been in the time of, I don't know, Bunyan or Blake or anybody like that, Jonathan Swift, the Royal Society of Literature now would be saying, no, we can't possibly say anything.
But I find the idea that knife-wielding maniacs need to be protected from offence doesn't make any sense to me. But is it the case that we have, as a culture, as a society, been failing on this issue, perhaps since the original fatwa against Salman Rushdie in 1989, where instead of a robust, collected view, you know, saying we will not stand for this, we will not have a foreign power threaten one of our greatest writers, instead of that, we had endless debates on television about whether he brought it on himself for, let's not forget, writing a book. Yeah, I mean, what can we do about this? You know?
It's quite extraordinary. I wonder how many people... I believe the Ayatollah didn't ever actually even read the book.
Of course not, no.
And
no,
I actually did read it and find it very difficult to see what the damage was, really. But anyway, I'll take that as accepted.
But it's easy to be offended by something if you don't bother reading it, I suppose.
Very easy indeed. But to go back to the point that I'm here for, which is that I believe, and that's why I resigned, the Royal Society of Literature has above all a duty to defend writers to say what they want to say. And if they can't do that, they shouldn't exist.
Do you think that, following the criticism we've seen this week from various sources, that the Royal Society of Literature at this point might reflect, you know, they might listen to what you're saying tonight, hopefully.
I hope so.
And they might change their direction on this?
They've been going for 200 years. Walter Scott started it. And for most of that time, they've done a wonderful job and they've been very well regarded, supported people. It's very recent. I think it's a product of, I don't know, cancel culture or a very conscientious culture, whatever we call it, that they are just running scared. And I think what needs to happen is, at the moment, actually, they've become so opaque themselves that to approach the board of 3 who run it, you have to post a public note on their website and you will get an answer after 8 weeks. It's quite a small society.
Yes, well, I hope they do listen to what you've got to say. And before you go, Miranda, can you just tell us about the kind of books that you write and the kind of work you've done?
Well, it's probably why I feel so strongly about this. My passion in life has been finding women who have been neglected or undervalued or misrepresented and writing about them. So one was about a wonderful racing driver who was dissed as a collaborator, and actually she hadn't collaborated at all. One was Byron's wife, who was incredibly annoying, but also wonderful and brave and courageous. And it's sort of fun to bring them back into prominence and get them looked at again.
Yes,
I love doing that.
Absolutely. And that, of course, is the power of the written word, which is something that the Royal Societies appear to be forgetting. Well, hopefully something can be done about this now, and hopefully they will backtrack a little bit.
Let's hope so.
Yeah, well, look, Miranda Seymour, thank you ever so much for joining me today. Really, really appreciate it.
It's been an honour, Andrew. Thank you.